Chapter 30. The more I knew of the inmates of Moor House, the better I liked them. In a few days I had so far recovered my health that I could sit up all day and walk out sometimes. I could join with Diana and Mary in their occupations, converse with them as much as they would, and aid them when and where they would allow me. There was a reviving pleasure in this intercourse, of a kind now tasted by me for the first time, a pleasure arising from perfect congeniality of tastes, sentiments, and principles. I liked to read what they liked to read, what they enjoyed, delighted me. What they approved, I reverenced. They loved their sequestered home. I, too, in the gray, small, antique structure, with its low roof, its latticed casements, its mouldering walls, its avenue of aged firs, all grown aslant under the stress of mountain winds, its garden, dark with yew and holly, and where no flowers but the hardest species could bloom, found a charm both potent and permanent. They clung to the purple moors behind them around their dwelling, to the hollow vale into which the pebbly bridle path leading from their gate descended, and which wound between fern banks first, then amongst a few of the wilderness little pasture fields that ever bordered a wilderness of heath, or gave sustenance to a flock of grey moorland sheep, while their little mossy-faced lambs, they clung to this scene, I say, with a perfect enthusiasm of attachment. I could comprehend the feeling and share both its strength and truth. I saw the fascination of the locality. I felt the consecration of its loneliness. My eye feasted on the outline of swell and sweep, on the wild coloring communicated to ridge and dwell by moss, by heath bell, by flower-sprinkled turf, by brilliant bracken, and mellow granite crag. These details were just to me what they were to them, so many pure and sweet sources of pleasure. The strong blast and soft breeze, the rough and the halcyon day, the hours of sunset and sunrise, the moonlight and the clouded night, developed for me in these regions the same attraction as for them, wound around my faculties the same spell that entranced theirs. Indoors we agreed equally well. They were both more accomplished and better read than I was, but with eagerness I followed in the path of knowledge they had trodden before me. I devoured the books they lent me. Then it was full satisfaction to discuss with them in the evening when I had perused during the day. Thought fitted thought. Opinion met opinion. We coincided, in short, perfectly. If in our trio there was a superior and a leader, it was Diana. Physically, she far excelled me. She was handsome, she was vigorous. Her animal spirits there was affluenced by life and certainty of flow, such as excited my wonder, while it baffled my comprehension. I could talk a while when the evening commenced, but the first gush of vivacity and fluency gone, I was fain to sit on a stool at Diana's feet, to rest my head on her knee and listen alternatively to her and Mary, while they sounded thoroughly the topic on which I had but touched. Diana offered to teach me German. I liked to learn of her. I saw the part of instructress pleasing and suited of her. That of scholar pleased and suited me no less. Our natures dovetailed, mutual affection of the strongest kind was the result. They discovered I could draw. Their pencils and color boxes were immediately at my service. My skill, greater in this one point than theirs, surprised and charmed them. Mary would sit and watch me by the hour together. Then she would take lessons, a docile, intelligent, assiduous pupil she made. Thus occupied and mutually entertained, days passed like hours and weeks like days. As to Mr. St. John, The intimacy which had arisen so naturally and rapidly between me and his sisters did not extend to him. One reason for the distance yet observed between us was that he was comparatively seldom at home. A large proportion of his time appeared devoted to visiting the sick and poor among the scattered population of his parish. No weather seemed to hinder him in these pastoral excursions. Rain or fair, he would, when his hours of morning study were over, take his hat, and, followed by his father's old pointer Carlo, go out on his mission of love or duty. I scarcely know in which light he regarded it. Sometimes, when the day was very unfavorable, his sisters would expostulate. He would then say with a peculiar smile, more solemn than cheerful, And if I let a gust of wind or a sprinkling of rain turn me aside from these easy tasks, what preparation would such sloth be for the future I proposed to myself? Diana and Mary's general answer to this question was a sigh and some minutes of apparently mournful meditation. But besides his frequent absences, there was another barrier to friendship with him. He seemed of a reserved and abstracted and even of a brooding nature, zealous in his ministerial labors, blameless in his life and habits. He yet did not appear to enjoy that mental severity, that inward content, which should be the reward of every sincere Christian and practical philanthropist. Often, of an evening, when he sat at the window, his desk and papers before him, he would cease reading or writing, rest his chin on his hand, and deliver himself up to I knowing not what course of thought. But that it was perturbed and exciting might be seen in the frequent flash and changeful dilation of his eye. I think, moreover, that nature was not to him that treasury of delight it was to his sisters. He expressed once, but once in my hearing, a strong sense of the rugged charm of the hills and an inborn affection for the dark roof and hoary walls he called his home. But there was more of gloom than pleasure in the tone and words in which the sentiment was manifested, and never did he seem to roam the moors for the sake of their soothing silence, never seek out or dwell upon the thousand peaceful delights they could yield. Incommunicative as he was, some time elapsed before I had an opportunity of gouging his mind. I first got an idea of its caliber when I had heard him preach in his own church at Morton. I wish I could describe that sermon, but it is past my power. I cannot even render faithfully the effect it produced on me. It began calm, and indeed, as far as delivery and pitch of voice went, it was calm to the end, an earnestly felt yet strictly restrained zeal breathed soon in the distinct accents and prompted the nervous language. This grew to force, compressed, condensed, controlled. The heart was thrilled, the mind astonished. By the power of the preacher, neither were softened. Throughout there was a single bitterness, an absence of consolatory gentleness, stern allusions to Calvinistic doctrines, election, predestination, reprobation, were frequent, and each reference to these points sounded like a sentence pronounced for doom. When he had done, instead of feeling better, calmer, more enlightened by his discourse, I experienced an inexpressible sadness, for it seemed to me, I know not whether equally so to others, that the eloquence to which I had been listening had sprung from the depth where lay turbid dregs of disappointment, where moved troubling impulses of insatiate yearnings and disquieting aspirations. I was so sure St. John Rivers, pure-lived, conscientious, zealous as he was, had not yet found that peace of God which passeth all understanding. He had no more found it, I thought, than I had with my concealed and racking regrets for my broken idol and lost Elysium. Regrets which I have latterly avoided referring, but which possessed me and tyrannized over me ruthlessly. Meantime, a month was gone. Diana and Mary were soon to leave Moor House and return to the far different life and scene which awaited them, as governesses in a large, fashionable south of England city, where each held a situation in families by whose wealthy and haughty members they were regarded as humble dependents, who neither knew nor sought out their innate excellences, and appreciated only their acquired accomplishments as they appreciated the skill of their cook or the taste of their waiting woman. Mr. St. John had said nothing to me yet about the employment he had promised to obtain for me, yet it became urgent that I should have a vocation of some kind. One morning, being left alone with him a few minutes in the parlor, I ventured to approach the window recess, which his table, chair, and desk consecrated as a kind of study, and I was going to speak, though not very well knowing in what words to frame my inquiry, for it is at all times difficult to break the ice of reserve glassing over such natures as his, when he saved me the trouble by being the first to commence a dialogue. Looking up as I drew near, "You have a question to ask of me," he said. "Yes. I wish to know whether you have heard of any service I can offer to undertake." "I found or devised something for you 3 weeks ago, but as you seemed both useful and happy here, as my sisters had evidently become to you, and your society gave them unusual pleasure, I deemed it expedient to break in on your mutual comfort till the approaching departure of Marsh End should render you yours necessary." "And they will go in 3 days now," I said. "Yes, and when they go, I shall return to the parsonage at Morton. Hannah will accompany me, and this old house will be shut up." I waited again for a few moments, expecting he would go on with the subject first broached. But he seemed to have entered another train of reflection. His look denoted abstraction from me and my business. I was obliged to recall him to a theme which was of necessity one of close and anxious interest to me. "What is the employment you had in view, Mr. Rivers? I hope this delay will not have increased the difficulty of securing it?" No. Since it is an employment which depends only on me to give and you to accept." He again paused. There seemed a reluctance to continue. I grew impatient. A restless movement or two, and an eager and exacting glance fastened on his face, conveyed the feeling to him as effectually as words could have done, and with less trouble. "You need be in no hurry to hear," he said. "Let me be frank with you. I have nothing eligible or profitable to suggest. Before I explain, recall, if you please, my notice clearly given that if I helped you, it must be as the blind man would help the lame. I am poor, for I find that when I have paid my father's debts, all the patrimony remaining to me will be this crumbling grange, the row of scathed firs behind, a patch of moorish soil, the yew trees and holly bushes in front. I am obscure. Rivers is an old name. But of the 3 sole descendants of the race, 2 earn the dependent crust amongst strangers, and the 3rd considers himself an alien to his native country, not only for life but in death, and deems, and is bound to deem, himself honored by the lot, and aspires but after the day when the cross of separation from fleshly ties shall be laid on his shoulders, when the head of the church militant of whose humblest members he is one, shall give the word, "Rise, follow me." St. John said these words as he pronounced his sermons, the quiet, deep voice, with an unflushed cheek, and a coruscating radiance of glance. He resumed, "And since I am myself poor and obscure, I can offer you better service of poverty and obscurity. You may even think it degrading, for I see now your habits have been what the world calls refined. Your taste leans to the ideal, your society has at least been amongst the educated. But I consider that no service degrades which can better our race. I hold that the more arid and unreclaimed the soil where the Christian labourer's task of tillage is appointed to him, the scantier the meed his toil brings, the higher the honour. His, under such circumstances, is the destiny of a pioneer, and the first pioneers of the gospel were the apostles. The captain was Jesus, the Redeemer himself. Well, I asked, as he again paused. Proceed. He looked at me before he proceeded. Indeed, he seemed leisurely to read my face, as if its features and lines were characters on a page. The conclusions drawn from the scrutiny he partially expressed in his succeeding observation. I believe you will accept the post I offer you, he said, and hold it for a while, not permanently though, any more than I could permanently keep the narrow and narrowing, the tranquil, hidden office of English country incumbent. For in your nature is an alloy as detrimental to repose as that in mine, though of a different kind. Do explain, I urged, when he halted once more. I will, and you shall hear how poor the proposal is, how trivial, how cramping. I shall not stay long at Morton, now that my father is dead, and that I am my own master. I shall leave the place probably in the course of a 12-month. But while I do stay, I exert myself to the utmost for its improvement. Morton, when I came to it 2 years ago, had no school. The children of the poor were excluded from every hope of progress. I established one for boys. I mean now to open a second school for girls. I have hired a building for the purpose, with a cottage of 2 rooms attached to it for the mistress's house. Her salary will be £30 a year. Her house is already furnished very simply but sufficiently, by the kindness of a lady, Miss Oliver, the only daughter of the sole rich man in my parish, Mr. Oliver, the proprietor of the needle factory and iron foundry in the valley. The lady pays for the education and clothing of an orphan from the workhouse, on condition that she shall aid the mistress in the menial offices connected with her own house and the school, as her occupation of teaching will prevent her having time to discharge in person. Will you be this mistress? He put the question rather hurriedly. He seemed half to expect an indignant, or at least a disdainful rejection of the offer. Not knowing all my thoughts and feelings, though guessing some, he could not tell in what light the lot would appear to me. In truth, it was humble, but then it was sheltered, and I wanted a safe asylum. It was plodding. But then, compared with that of a governess in a rich house, it was independent, and the fear of servitude with strangers entered my soul like iron. It was not ignoble, not unworthy, not mentally degrading. I made my decision. I thank you for the proposal, Mr. Rivers, and I accept it with all my heart. But you comprehend me, he said. It is a village school. Your scholars will be only poor girls, cottagers' children at best, farmers' daughters. Knitting, sewing, reading, writing, ciphering will be all you will have to teach. What will you do with your accomplishments? What with the largest portion of your mind, sentiments, tastes? Save them till they are wanted. They will keep. You know what you want to take, then? I do. He now smiled. Not a bitter or a sad smile, but one well pleased and gratified. And when will you commence the exercise of your function? I will go to my house tomorrow, and open the school, if you like, next week. Very well. So be it. He rose and walked through the room. Standing still, he looked at me again. He shook his head. What do you disapprove of, Mr. Rivers? I asked. You will not stay long at Morton. No. Why? What is your reason for saying so? I read it in your eyes. It is not of that description which promises the maintenance of even tenor in life. I am not ambitious. He started at the word ambitious. He repeated, No. What made you think of ambition? Who is ambitious? I know I am. But how did you find it out? I was speaking of myself. Well, if you're not ambitious, you... He paused. What? I was going to say impassioned, but perhaps you would have misunderstood the word and been displeased. I mean that human affections and sympathies have most powerful hold on you. I'm sure you cannot be long to content to pass your leisure in solitude, devote your working hours to a monotonous labor wholly void of stimulus, any more than I can be content, he added with emphasis. Live here, buried in morass, pent in with mountains. My nature that God gave me contravened, my faculties heaven bestowed paralyzed, made useless. You hear now how I contradict myself. I, who preached contentment with a humble lot, and justified the vocation even of hewers of wood and drawers of water in God's service, I, his ordained minister, almost rave in my restlessness. Well, propensities and principles must be reconciled by some means. He left the room. In this brief hour, I had learnt more of him than in the whole previous month. Yet, he still puzzled me. Diana and Mary's came more sad and silent as the day approached for leaving their brother in their home. They both tried to appear as usual, but the sorrow had struggled against was one that could not entirely be conquered or concealed. Diana intimated that this would be difficult, parting from any they had ever known. It probably would, as far as St. John was concerned, be a parting for years. It might be a parting for life. He will sacrifice all his long-framed resolves, he said. Natural affection and feelings more potent still. St. John looks quiet, Jane, but he hides a fever in his vitals. You would think him gentle, yet in some things he is inexorable as death. And by worse of it, my conscience will hardly permit to dissuade him from a severe decision. Certainly not. I cannot for a moment blame him for it. It is right, noble, Christian. Yet it breaks my heart. And the tears gushed from her fine eyes. Mary bent her head low over her work. We are now without father. We shall soon be without home and brother, he murmured. At that moment, a little accident supervened, which seemed decreed by fate purposely to prove the truth of the adage that misfortunes never come singly, and to add to their distresses the vexing one of the slip between the cup and the lip. St. John passed the window, reading a letter. He entered. "Our Uncle John is dead," said he. Both sisters seemed struck, not shocked or appalled. The tidings appeared in their eyes rather momentous than afflicting. "Dead," repeated Diana. "Yes." She riveted a searching gaze on her brother's face. "And what then?" she demanded in a low voice. "What then die?" he replied, maintaining a marble immobility. "Teacher, what then?" "Nothing. Read." He threw the letter into her lap. She glanced over it and handed it to Mary. Mary perused it in silence and returned it to her brother. All three looked at each other and all three smiled. A dreary, pensive smile enough. "Amen. We can yet live," said Diana at last. "At any rate, it makes us no worse off than we were before," remarked Mary. "Only it forces rather strongly on the mind the picture of what might have been," said Mr. Rivers, "and it contrasts with somewhat too vividly with what is." He folded the letter, locked it in his desk, and went out. For some minutes no one spoke. Diana then turned to me. "Jane, you will wonder at us and our mysteries," she said, "and think us hard-hearted beings not to be more moved at the death of so near a relation as an uncle. But we have never seen him or known him. He was my mother's brother. My father and he quarreled long ago. It was by his advice that my father risked most of his property in the speculation that ruined him. Mutual recrimination passed between them. They parted in anger and they were never reconciled. My uncle engaged afterwards in more prosperous undertakings. It appears he realized a fortune of £20,000. He was never married and had no one near kindred but ourselves and one other person, not more closely related than we. My father always cherished the idea that he would atone for his error by leaving his possessions to us. That letter informs us that he has bequeathed every penny to the other relation, with the exception of the 30 guineas, to be divided between St. John, Diana, and Mary Rivers for the purchase of 3 mourning rings. He had a right, of course, to do as he pleased, and yet a momentary damp is cast on the spirit by the receipt of this news. Mary and I would have some esteem ourselves rich with £1,000 each, and to St. John, such a sum would have been valuable for the good it could have enabled him to do. This explanation given, the subject was dropped, and no further reference made to it by either Mr. Rivers or his sister. The day I left Marsh End for Morton was the next day. The day after, Diana and Mary quitted for it, a distant blank. In a week, Mr. Rivers and Hannah repaired to the parsonage, and so the old grange was abandoned. Chapter 31. My home then, when I at last find a home, is a cottage, a little room with whitewash walls and a sanded floor, containing 4 painted chairs and a table, a clock, a cupboard with 2 or 3 plates and dishes, and a set of tea things in a delf. Above, a chamber of the same dimensions as the kitchen, with a deal bedstead and chest of drawers, small, yet too large to be filled with my scanty wardrobe, though the kindness of my gentle and generous friends has increased that, by a modest stock of such things are necessary. It is evening. I have dismissed, with a fee of an orange, the little orphan who helps me as a handmaid. I am sitting alone on the hearth. This morning the village school had opened. I had 20 scholars, but 3 of the number can read. None can write or cipher. Several knit, and few sew a little. They speak with the broadest accent of the district. At present, they and I have some difficulty in understanding each other's language. Some of them are unmannered, rough, intractable, as well as ignorant, and others are docile, have a wish to learn, and evince a disposition that pleases me. I must not forget that these coarsely clad little peasants are of flesh and blood, as good as the scions of the gentlest genealogy, and that the germs of native excellence, refinement, intelligence, and kind feeling are as likely to exist in their hearts as in those of the best born. My duty will be to develop these germs. Surely I shall find some happiness in discharging that office. Much enjoyment I do not expect in life opening before me, yet it will doubtless, if I regulate my mind and exert my powers as I ought, yield me enough to live on from day to day. Was I very gleeful, settled, content during the hours I passed in yonder bare, humble schoolroom this morning and afternoon? Not to deceive myself, I must reply, no. I felt desolate to a degree. I felt, yes, idiot that I am, I felt degraded. I doubted I had taken a step which sank instead of rising me in the scale of social existence. I was weakly dismayed at the ignorance, the poverty, the coarseness of all I heard and saw around me. But let me not hate and despise myself too much for these feelings. I know them to be wrong. That is a great step gained. I shall strive to overcome them. Tomorrow, I trust, I shall get the better of them partially, and in a few weeks, perhaps, they will be quite subdued. In a few months, it is possible the happiness of seeing progress, and a change for the better in my scholars may substitute gratification for disgust. In the meantime, let me ask myself one question. Which is better? To have surrendered to temptation, listened to passion, made a painful effort, no struggle, but to have sunk down in the silken snare, fallen asleep on the flowers covering it, wakened in a southern clime amongst the luxuries of a pleasure villa, to have been living in France, Mr. Rochester's mistress, delirious with his love half my time, for he would, oh yes, he would have loved me well for a while. He did love me. No one will ever love me again so. I shall never more know the sweet homage given to beauty, youth, and grace, for never to anyone else shall I seem to possess these charms. He was fond and proud of me. It is what no man besides will ever be. But where am I wandering, and what am I saying, and above all, feeling? Whether it is better, I ask, to be a slave in a fool's paradise at Marseilles, fevered with delusive bliss an hour, suffocating with the bitterest tears of remorse and shame the next, or to be a village schoolmistress, free and honest, in a breezy mountain nook in a healthy heart of England. Yes, I now feel that I was right when I adhered to the principle and law and scorned and crushed the insane promptings of a frenzied moment. God directed me to a correct choice. I thank his providence for the guidance. Having brought my eventide musings to this point, I rose, went to my door, and looked at the sunset of the harvest day, and at the quiet fields before my cottage, which, with the school, was distant half a mile from the village. The birds were singing their last strains. The air was mild, the dew was balm. While I looked, I thought myself happy, and was surprised to find myself ere long weeping. And why? For the doom which had reft me from adhesion to my master, for him I was no more thee. For the desperate grief and fatal fury, consequences of my departure, which might now perhaps be dragging him further from the path of right, too far to leave hope of ultimate restoration thither. At this thought, I turned my face aside from the lovely sky of eve and lonely vale of Morton. I say lonely, for in that bend of it visible to me, there was no building apparent save the church and the parsonage, half hid in trees, and quiet at the extremity, the roof of Vale Hall, where the rich Mr. Oliver and his daughter lived. I hid my eyes and leant my head against the stone frame of my door, but soon a slight noise near the wicket, which shut in my tiny garden from the meadow beyond, made me look up. A dog, old Carlo, Mr. Rivers' pointer, as I saw in a moment, was pushing the gate with his nose, and St. John himself leant upon it with folded arms. His brow knit, his gaze, grave, almost to displeasure, fixed on me. I asked him to come in. "No, I cannot stay. I have only brought you a little parcel my sister's left for you. I think it contains a color box, pencils, and paper." I approached to take it. A welcome gift it was. He examined my face, I thought with austerity, as I came near. The traces of tears were doubtless very visible on it. "Have you found your first day's work harder than you expected?" he asked. "No, on the contrary. I think in time I shall get on with my scholars very well." "But perhaps your accommodations, your cottage, your furniture, have disappointed your expectations. They are, in truth, scanty enough, but—" I interrupted. "My cottage is clean and weatherproof, my furniture sufficient and commodious. All I see has made me thankful, not despondent. I am absolutely such a fool and sensuous as to regret the absence of a carpet, a sofa, a silver plate. Besides, 5 weeks ago I had nothing. I was an outcast, a beggar, a vagrant. Now I have acquaintance, a home, a business. I wonder at the goodness of God, the generosity of my friends, the bounty of my lot. I do not repine." "But do you feel solitude in that oppression? The little house there behind you is dark and empty." "I have hardly time yet to enjoy the sense of tranquility, much less to grow impatient under one of loneliness." "Very well. I hope you feel the content you express. At any rate, your good sense will tell you that this is too soon yet to yield to the vacillating tears of Lot's wife. What you had left before I saw you, of course I do not know, but I counsel you to resist firmly every temptation which would incline you to look back. Pursue your present career steadily, for some months at least." "It is what I mean to do," I answered. St. John continued. "It is hard work to control the workings of inclination and turn the bent of nature, but that it may be done. I know from experience God has given us, in a measure, the power to make our own fate, and when our energies seem to demand a sustenance they cannot get, when our will strains after a path we may not follow, we need neither starve in a nation. nor stand still in despair. We have but to seek another nourishment for the mind, as strong as the forbidden food long to taste, and perhaps pure, and to hew out for the adventurous foot a road as direct and broad as the one fortune has blocked up against us, if rougher than it. A year ago I was myself intensely miserable, because I thought I had made a mistake in entering the ministry. Its uniform duties wearied me to death. I burnt for the more active life of the world, for the more exciting toils of the literary career, for the destiny of an artist, author, orator. Anything rather than that of a priest. Yes, the heart of a politician, of a soldier, of a votary of glory, a lover of renown, a luster after power. Beat under my curate's supplice, I considered my life was so wretched it must be changed or I must die. After a season of darkness and struggling, light broke and relief fell. My cramped existence all at once spread out to a plain without bonds. My powers heard a call from heaven to rise, gather their full strength, spread their wings, and mount beyond ken. God had an errand for me to bear which afar, to deliver it well, skill and strength, courage and eloquence, the best qualifications of soldier, statesman, and orator were all needed, for these all center at the good missionary. The missionary I resolved to be. From that moment my state of mind changed. The fetters dissolved and dropped from every faculty, leaving nothing of bondage but its galling soreness, which time only can heal. My father indeed imposed the determination, but since his death, I have not a legitimate obstacle to contend with. Some affairs settled, a successor for Morton provided. An entanglement or two of the feelings broken through and cut asunder. At last conflict with human weakness, in which I know I shall overcome, because I have vowed that I will overcome and leave Europe for the East. He said this in his peculiar, subdued, yet emphatic voice, looking when he had ceased speaking not at me, but at the setting sun, at which I looked too. Both he and I had our backs toward the path leading up to the field to the wicket. We had heard no step on that grass-grown track. The water running in the vale was the one lulling sound of the hour and scene. We might well then start with when a gay voice, sweet as a silver bell, exclaimed, "Good evening, Mr. Rivers, and good evening, old Carlo. Your dog is quicker to recognize his friends than you are, sir. He pricked his ears and wagged his tail when I was at the bottom of the field. You have your back towards me now." It was true. Though Mr. Rivers had started at the first of the musical accents, as if a thunderbolt had split a cloud over his head, he stood yet, at the close of the sentence, in the same attitude in which the speaker had surprised him, his arm resting on the gate, his face directed towards the west. He turned at last, with measured deliberation. A vision, as it seemed to me, had risen at his side. There appeared, within 3 feet of him, a form clad in pure white, a youthful, graceful form, full yet fine in contour, and when, after bending to caress Carlo, it lifted up its head and threw back a long veil, where there bloomed under his glance a face of pure beauty. Perfect beauty is a strong expression, but I do not retrace or qualify it. As sweet features as ever the temperate clime of Albion molded, as pure hues of rose and lily had as ever her humid gales and vapory skies generated and screened, justified, in this instance, the term No charm was wanting, no defect was perceptible. The young girl had regular and delicate lineaments, eyes shaped and colored, as we see them in lovely pictures, large and dark and full. The long and shadowy eyelash, which encircles a fine eye with so soft a fascination, penciled brow which gives us such clearness, the white soothed forehead, which adds such repose to the livelier beauties of tint and ray, the cheek oval, fresh and smooth, the lips fresh too, ruddy, healthy, sweetly formed, even the gleaming teeth without flaw, the small dimpled chin, the ornament of rich, plenteous tresses, all advantages in short which combined realize the ideal of beauty, were fully hers. I wondered as I looked at this fair creature. I admired her with my whole heart. Nature had surely formed her in a partial mood, and, forgetting her usual stinted stepmother dole of gifts, had endowed this, her darling, with a grand dame's bounty. What did St. John Rivers think of this earthly angel? I naturally asked myself that question as I saw him turn to her and look at her, and as naturally I sought the answer to the inquiry in his countenance. He had already withdrawn his eye from the Peri, and was looking at a humble tuft of daisies which grew by a wicket. "A lovely evening, but late for you to be out alone," he said, as he crushed the snowy heads of the closed flowers with his foot. "Oh, I only came home from blank." He mentioned the name of a large town some 20 miles distant. "This afternoon. Papa told me you had opened your school and that a new mistress was come. So I put on my bonnet after tea and ran up the valley to see her. Is this she?" Pointing to me. "It is," said Mr. St. John. "Do you think you shall like Morton?" he asked of me, with a direct and naive simplicity of tone and manner, pleasing, if childlike. "I shall. I have many inducements to do so." "Did you find your scholars as attentive as you expected?" "Quite." "You like your house?" "Very much." "Have I furnished it nicely?" "Very nicely indeed." "And made a good choice of attendant for you in Alice Wood?" "You have indeed. She is teachable and handy." This, then, I thought, is Miss Oliver, the heiress, favored, it seems, in the gifts of fortune, as well as in those of nature. What happy combination of the planets presided over her birth, I wonder. "I shall come up and help you to teach sometimes," she added. "It will be a change for me to visit you now and then, and I like change. Mr. Rivers, I've been so gay during my stay at blank. Last night, or rather this morning, I was dancing till 2 o'clock. The blank regiment are stationed there since the riots. The officers, the most agreeable men in the world. They put all our young knife grinders and scissor merchants to shame." It seemed to me that Mr. St. John's under lip protruded, and his upper lip curled a moment. His mouth certainly looked a good deal compressed, and the lower part of his face unusually stern and square as the laughing girl gave him this information. He lifted his gaze, too, from the daisies and turned it on her, an unsmiling, a searching, a meaning gaze it was. She answered it with a second laugh. Her laughter well became her youth, her roses, her dimples, her bright eyes. As he stood, mute and grave, she fell again to caressing Carlo. "Oh, Carlo loves me," said she. "He is not stern and distant to his friends, and if he could speak, he would not be silent." As she patted the dog's head, bending with native grace before his young, austere master. I saw a glow rise to that master's face. I saw his solemn eye melt with sudden fire, and a flicker with resistless emotion. Flushed and kindled thus, he looked nearly as beautiful for a man as she for a woman. His chest heaved once, as if his large heart, weary of despotic constriction, had expanded, despite the will, and made a vigorous bound for the attainment of liberty. But he curbed it, I think, as a absolute rider would curb a rearing steed. He responded neither by word nor movement to the gentle advances made him. "Papa says you never come to see us now," continued Miss Oliver, looking up. "You are quite a stranger at Vale Hall. He is alone this evening and not very well. Will you return with me and visit him?" "It is not a seasonable hour to intrude on Mr. Oliver," answered St. John. "Not a seasonable hour? I declare it is. It is just the hour when Papa most wants company. When the works are closed and he has no business to occupy him. Now, Mr. Rivers, do come. Why are you so very shy and so very somber?" She filled up the hiatus his silence left by a reply of her own. "I forgot," she exclaimed, shaking her beautifully curled head as if it shocked herself. "I am so giddy and thoughtless, do excuse me. It had slipped my memory that you have good reasons to be indisposed for joining my chatter. Diana and Mary have left you, and Moor House is shut up, and you are lonely. I am sure I pity you. Do come and see Papa." "Not tonight, Miss Rosamond, not tonight." Mr. St. John spoke almost like an automaton. Himself only knew the effort it cost him thus to refuse. "Well, if you are so obstinate, I will leave you, for I dare not stay any longer. The dew begins to fall. Good evening." She held out her hand. He touched it. "Good evening," he repeated, in a voice low and hollow as an echo. He turned, but in a moment returned. "Are you well?" she asked. Well might he put the question. His face was blanched as her gown. "Quite well," he enunciated, and with a bow he left the gate. She went one way, and he another. She turned twice to gaze after him as she tripped fairy-like down the field. He, as he strode firmly across, never turned at all. The spectacle of another's suffering and sacrifice wrapped my thoughts from exclusive meditation on my own. Diana Rivers had designated her brother inexorable as death. She had not exaggerated. Chapter 32. I continued the labors of my village school as actively and faithfully as I could. It was truly hard work at first. Some time elapsed before, with all my efforts, I could comprehend my scholars and their nature. Wholly untaught, with faculties quite torpid, they seemed to me hopelessly dull, and at first sight, all dull alike. But I soon found I was mistaken. There was a difference amongst them as amongst the educated. When I got to know them and they me, this difference rapidly developed itself. Their amazement at me, my language, my rules, my ways, once subsidized. I found some of these heavy-looking, gaping rustics wake up into sharp-witted girls enough. Many showed themselves obliging and amiable, too. And I discovered amongst them not a few examples of natural politeness and innate self-respect, as well as of excellent capacity that won both my goodwill and my admiration. These soon took a pleasure in doing their work well, in keeping their persons neat, in learning their tasks regularly, and acquiring quiet and orderly manners. The rapidity of their progress in some instances was even surprising. and an honest and happy pride I took in it. Besides, I began personally to like some of the best girls, and they liked me. I had amongst my scholars several farmers' daughters, young women grown almost. These could already read and write and sew, and to them I taught the elements of grammar, geography, history, the finer kinds of needlework. I found estimable, estim, estim, am I, es, yeah, estimable, estimable, yes? I found estimable characters among them, characters desirous of information and disposed for improvement, with whom I passed many a pleasant evening hour in their own homes. Their parents, then, the farmer and his wife, loaded me with attentions. There was an enjoyment in accepting their simple kindness and in repaying it by a consideration, a scrupulous regard to their feelings, to which they were not perhaps at all times accustomed, and which both charmed and benefited them, because while it elevated them in their own eyes, it made them emollious to merit the differential treatment they received. I felt I became a favorite in the neighborhood. Whenever I was out, I heard all sides cordial salutations, and was welcomed with friendly smiles. To live amidst general regard, though it be but the regard of working people, is like sitting in sunshine calm and sweet, serene inward feelings but bud and bloom under the ray. At this point of my life, my heart far oftener swelled with thankfulness than sank with dejection. And yet, reader, to tell you all, in the midst of this calm, this useful existence, day after a day passed in honorable exertion amongst scholars, an evening spent in drawing and reading contentedly alone, I used to rush into strange dreams at night, dreams many-colored, agitated, full of the ideal, the stirring, the stormy. Dreams where, amidst unusual scenes, charged with adventure, with agitating risk and romantic chance, I still again and again met Mr. Rochester, always at some exciting crisis, and then the sense of being in his arms, hearing his voice, meeting his eye, touching his hand and cheek, loving him, being loved by him, the hope of passing a lifetime at his side would be renewed with all its first force and fire. Then I woke. Then I recalled where I was and how situated. Then I rose up on my curtainless bed, trembling and quivering, and then the still dark night witnessed the convulsion of despair, heard the bursts of passion. By 9 o'clock the next morning I was punctually opening the school, tranquil, settled, prepared for the steady duties of the day. Rosamond Oliver kept her word in coming to visit me. Her call at the school was generally made in the course of her morning ride. She would canter up to the door on her pony, followed by a mounted livery servant. Anything more exquisite than her appearance and her purple habit, with her Amazon's cap of black velvet placed gracefully above long curls that kissed her cheek and floated to her shoulders, can scarcely be imagined. And it was thus she would enter the rustic building and glide through the dazzled ranks of the village children. She generally came at an hour when Mr. Rivers was engaged in giving his daily catechizing lesson. Keenly, I fear, did the eye of the visitress pierce the young pastor's heart. A sort of instinct seemed to warn him of her entrance, even when he did not see it. And when he was looking quite away from the door, if she appeared at it, his cheek would glow and his marble-seeming features, though they refused to relax, changed indescribably, and their very quiescence became expressive of a repressed fervor. stronger than working muscle or darting glance could indicate. Of course, she knew her power. Indeed, he did not, because he could not conceal it from her. In spite of his Christian stoicism, when she went up and addressed him and smiled gaily, encouragingly, even fondly in his face, his hand would tremble and his eye burn. He seemed to say with his sad and resolute look, if he did not say it with his lips, "I love you, and I know you prefer me. It is not despair of success that keeps me dumb. If I offered my heart, I believe you would accept it. That heart has already laid on a sacred altar. The fire is arranged round it. It would soon be no more than a sacrifice consumed." And then she would pout like a disappointed child. A pensive cloud would soften her radiant vivacity. She would withdraw her hand hastily from his and turn in transient petulance from his aspect, at once so heroic and so martyr-like. St. John, no doubt, would have given the world to follow, recall, retain her when she thus left him. But he would not give one chance of heaven nor relinquish, for the Elysium of her love, one hope of the true eternal paradise. Besides, he could not bind all that he had in his nature, the rover, the aspirant, the poet, the priest, in the limits of a single passion. He could not, he would not, renounce his wild field of mission warfare for the parlors and the peace of Vale Hall. I learned so myself. I learned so much from himself in an erode I once, despite his reserve, had the daring to make on his confidences. Miss Oliver already honored me with frequent visits to my cottage. I had learnt her whole character, which was without mystery or disguise. She was coquettish, but not heartless, exacting, but not worthlessly selfish. She had been indulged from her birth, but was not absolutely spoiled. She was hasty, but good-humored, vain, she could not help it when every glance in the glass showed her such a flush of loveliness, but not affected, liberal-handed, innocent of the pride of wealth, ingenious, sufficiently intelligent, gay, lively, and unthinking. She was very charming, in short, even to a cool observer of her own sex like me. But she was not profoundly interesting or thoroughly impressive. A very different sort of mind was hers from that, for instance, of the sisters of St. John. Still, I liked her almost as I liked my pupil Adele, except that for a child whom we have watched over and taught, closer affection is indeed engendered than we can give an equally attractive adult acquaintance. She had taken an amiable caprice to me. She said I was like Mr. Rivers, only certainly she allowed not 1/10 so handsome, though I was a nice, neat little soul enough. But he was an angel. I was, however, good, clever, composed, and firm like him. I was luceless naturæ, she affirmed as a village schoolmistress. She was sure my previous history, if known, would make a delightful romance. One evening, while, with her usual childlike activity and thoughtless yet not offensive inquisitiveness, she was rummaging the cupboard and the table drawer of my little kitchen, she discovered first 2 French books, a volume of Schiller, and a German grammar and dictionary, then my drawing materials and some sketches, including a pencil head of a pretty little shrub-like girl, one of my scholars, and sundry views from nature, taken in the Vale of Morton and on surrounding moors. She was transfixed with surprise, and then electrified with delight. Had I done these pictures? Did I know French and German? What a love, what a miracle I was. I drew better than her master in the first school in blank. Would I sketch a portrait of her to show Papa? With pleasure, I replied, and I felt a thrill of artist delight at the idea of copying from so perfect and radiant a model. She had then on a dark blue silk dress. Her arms and neck were bare. Her only ornament was her chestnut tresses, which waved over her shoulders with a wild grace of natural curls. I took a sheet of fine cardboard and drew a careful outline. I promised myself the pleasure of coloring it, and as it was getting late then, I told her she must come and sit in another day. She made such a report of me to her father that Mr. Oliver himself accompanied her the next evening, a tall, massive-featured, middle-aged and gray-headed man, whose side his lovely daughter looked like a bright flower near a hoary turret. He appeared a taciturn and, perhaps, a proud personage, but he was very kind to me. The sketch of Rosamond's portrait pleased him highly. He said I must make a finished picture of it. He insisted, too, on my coming the next day and spending the evening at Vale Hall. I went. I found it a large, handsome residence, showing abundant evidences of wealth in the proprietor. Rosamond was full of glee and pleasure all the time I stayed. Her father was affable, and when he entered into conversation with me after tea, he expressed in strong terms his approbation of what I had done in Morton School. He said he only feared from what he saw and heard I was too good for the place and would soon quit it for one more suitable. "Indeed," cried Rosamond, "she is clever enough to be a governess in a high family, Papa." I thought I would far rather be where I am than in a high family in the land. Mr. Oliver spoke of Mr. Rivers, of the Rivers family, with great respect. He said it was a very old name in the neighborhood. The ancestors of the house were wealthy, that the Morton had once belonged to them, that even now he considered the representative of that house might, if he liked, make an alliance with the best. He accounted it a pity that so fine and talented a young man should have formed the design of going out as a missionary, and it was quite throwing a valuable life away. It appeared then that her father would throw no obstacle in the way of Rosamond's union with St. John. Mr. Oliver evidently regarded the young clergyman's good birth, old name, and sacred profession as sufficient compensation for the want of a fortune. It was the 5th of November, and a holiday. My little servant, after helping me to clean the house, was gone, well satisfied with a fee of a penny for her aid. All about me was spotless and bright, scoured floor, polished gray, well-rubbed chairs. I had also made myself neat, and now, the afternoon before me, to spend as I would. The translation of a few pages of German occupied an hour. Then I got my palette and pencils and fell to more soothing, because easier occupation of completing Rosamond Oliver's miniature. The head was finished already. There was but the background to tint and the drapery to shade off. A touch of carmine, too, to add to the ripe lips, a soft curl here and there to the tresses, a deeper tinge to the shadow of the lash under the zeroed eyelid. I was absorbed in the execution of these nice details when, after one rapid tap, my door unclosed, admitting St. John Rivers. Also, side note, I know I've said St. John a lot. Text-wise, if you read it with modern words, it is Saint John, by a coworker of mine who knows a thing or two, said that it would be appropriately pronounced St. John. "I am come to see how you are spending your holiday," he said. "Not, I hope, in thought?" "No, that is well. While you draw, you will not feel lonely. You see, I mistrust you still, though you have borne up wonderfully so far. I have brought you a book for evening solace." And he laid on the table a new publication, a poem, one of the genuine productions so often vouchsafed to the fortune public of those days, the golden age of modern literature. Alas, the readers of our era are less favored. But courage! I will not pause either to accuse or repine. I know poetry is not dead, nor genius thus, nor has Mammon gained power over either, to bind or slay. They will both assert their existence, their presence, their liberty and strength again one day. Powerful angels safe in heaven. They smile when sordid souls triumph, and feeble ones weep over their destruction. Poetry destroyed? Genius banished? No. Mediocrity? No. Do not let envy prompt you to the thought. No, they do not only live, but reign and redeem. And without their divine influence spread everywhere, you will be in hell, the hell of your own meanness. While I was eagerly glancing at the bright pages of Marmion, or Marmon it was, St. John stooped to examine my drawing. His tall figure sprang erect again with a start. He said nothing. I looked up at him. He shunned my eye. I knew his thoughts well, and could read his heart plainly. At the moment I felt calmer and cooler than he. I had then temporarily the advantage of him, and I conceived an inclination to do him some good, if I could. With all his firmness and self-control, thought I, he tasks himself too far, locks up every feeling and pang within, expresses, confesses, imparts nothing. I am sure it would benefit him to talk a little about this sweet Rosamond, whom he thinks he ought not to marry. I will make him talk. I said first, "Take a chair, Mr. Rivers." But he answered, as he always did, that he could not stay. "Very well," I responded mentally. "Stand up if you like. But you shall not go just yet. I am determined. Solitude is at least as bad for you as it is for me. I'll try if I cannot discover the secret spring of your confidence, and find an aperture in that marble breast through which I can shed one drop of the balm of sympathy. Is this portrait like?" I asked bluntly. "Like? Like whom?" I did not observe it closely. "You did, Mr. Rivers." He almost started at my sudden and strange abruptness. He looked at me astonished. "Oh, that is nothing yet," I muttered within. "I don't mean to be baffled by a little stiffness on your part. I'm prepared to go to considerable lengths." I continued, "You observed it closely and distinctly, but I have no objection to your looking at it again." And I rose and placed it in his hand. "A well-executed picture," he said. "Very soft, clear coloring, very graceful, and correct drawing." Yes, I know all that. But what of the resemblance? Who is it like?" Mastering some hesitation, he answered, "Miss Oliver, I presume." "Of course. And now, sir, to reward you for the accurate guess, I will promise to paint you a careful and faithful duplicate of this very picture, provided you admit that the gift would be acceptable to you. I don't wish to throw away my time and trouble in an offering you would deem worthless." He continued to gaze at the picture. The longer he looked, the firmer he held it, the more he seemed to covet it. "It is like," he murmured. "The eye is well managed, the color, the light, expression are perfect. It smiles." Would it comfort or would it wound you to have a similar painting? Tell me that. When you are at Madagascar, or at the Cape, or in India, would it be a consolation to have that memento in your possession, or would the sight of it bring recollections calculated to enervate and distress? He now furtively raised his eyes. He glanced at me, irresolute, disturbed. He again surveyed the picture. "That I should like to have it is certain. Whether it would be judicious or wise is another question." Since I had ascertained that Rosamond really preferred him and that her father was not likely to oppose the match, I, less exalted in my views than St. John, had been strongly disposed in my heart to advocate their union. It seemed to me that should he become the possessor of Mr. Oliver's large fortune, he might do as much good with it as he went and laid his genius out to wither, and his strength to waste, under a tropical sun. With this persuasion I now answered, "As far as I can see, it would be wiser and more judicious if you were to take yourself the original at once." By this time he had sat down. He had laid the picture on the table before him, and with his brow supported on both hands, he hung fondly over it. I discerned he was now neither angry nor shocked at my audacity. I saw even that to be thus frankly addressed on a subject he had deemed unapproachable, to hear it thus freely handed was beginning to be felt by him as a new pleasure, an unhoped-for relief. Reserved people often really need the frank discussion of their sentiments and griefs more than the expansive. The stern-seeming stoic is human after all, and to burst, with boldness and goodwill, into the silent sea of their souls is often to confer on them the first of obligations. "She likes you, I am sure," I said, as I stood behind his chair, "and her father respects you. Moreover, she is a sweet girl, rather thoughtless, but you would have sufficient thought for both yourself and her. You ought to marry her." "Does she like me?" he asked. "Certainly. Better than she likes anyone else. She talks of you continually. There is no subject she enjoys so much or touches upon so often." "It is pleasant to hear this," he said. "Very. Go on, for another quarter of an hour." And he actually took out his watch and laid it upon the table to measure the time. "But where is the use of going on?" I asked, "when you are probably preparing some iron blow of contradiction or forging a fresh chain to fetter your heart?" "Don't imagine such hard things. Fancy me yielding and melting as I am doing, human love rising like freshly opened fountain in my mind, overflowing with sweet inundation all the field I have so carefully and with such labor prepared, so assiduously sown with the seeds of good intentions, of self-denying plans, and now is deluged with a nectarous flood, the young germs swamped, delicious poison cankering them now. Now I see myself stretched on an ottoman in the drawing-room at Valhall as my bride Rosamond Oliver's feet. At my bride Rosamond Oliver's feet. She is talking to me with her sweet voice, gazing down on me with those eyes your skillful hand has copied so well, smiling at me with coral lips. She is mine, and I am hers. This life and passing world suffice for me. Hush. Say nothing. My heart is full of delight. My senses are entranced. Let the time I marked pass in peace. I humored him. The watch ticked on. He breathed fast and low. I stood silent. I stood silent. Amidst this hush and quartet sped. He replaced the watch, laid the picture down, rose, and stood on the hearth. Now, said he, that little space was given to delirium and delusion. I rested my temples on the breast of temptation and put my neck voluntarily under her yoke of flowers. I tasted her cup. The pillow was burning. There was an asp in the godland. The wine has a bitter taste. The promises are hollow. Her offers are false. Her offers are false. I see and know all this. I gazed at him in wonder. It is strange, pursued he, that while I love Rosamond Oliver so wildly, with all the intensity indeed of a first passion, the object of which is exquisitely beautiful, graceful, fascinating, I experience at the same time a calm, unwarped consciousness that she would not make me a good wife, that she is not a partner suited to me, that I should discover this within a year after marriage. The 12 months' rapture would succeed a lifetime of regret. This I know. Strange indeed, I could not help ejaculating. While something in me, he went on, is acutely sensible to her charms, something is deeply impressive with her defects. They are such that she could sympathize in nothing as I aspired to, cooperating in nothing I undertook. Rosamond, a sufferer, a laborer, a female apostle. Rosamond, a missionary's wife? No. But you need not be a missionary. You might relinquish that scheme. Relinquish? What? My vocation? My great work? My foundation laid on earth for a mansion in heaven? My hopes of becoming numbered in a band who have merged all ambitions in the glorious one of bettering their race, of carrying knowledge into the realms of ignorance, of substituting peace for war, freedom for bondage, religion for superstition, the hope of heaven for the fear of hell. Must I relinquish that? It is dearer than the blood in my veins. It is what I have to look forward to and to live for. After considerable pause, I said, and Miss Oliver, are her disappointment and sorrow of no interest to you? Miss Oliver is ever surrounded by suitors and flatterers. In less than a month my image will be effaced from her heart. She will forget me and will marry, probably, someone who will make her far happier than I should do. You speak coolly enough, but you suffer in the conflict. You are wasting away. No. If I get a little thin, it is with anxiety about my prospects yet unsettled. My departure continually procrastinated. Only this morning I received intelligence that the successor whose arrival I had been so long expecting cannot be ready to replace me for three months yet to come. Perhaps the 3 months may extend to 6. You tremble and become flushed whenever Miss Oliver enters the schoolroom. Again, the surprised expression crossed his face. He had not imagined that a woman would dare speak so to a man. For me, I felt at home in this sort of discourse. I could never rest in communication with strong, discreet, and refined minds, whether male or female. till I had passed the outworks of conventional reserve, crossed the threshold of confidence, and won a place by their heart's very hearthstone. "You are original," said he, "and not timid. There's something brave in your soul as well as penetrating in your eye. But allow me to assure you that you partially misinterpret my emotions. You think them more profound, potent than they are, and give me a larger allowance of sympathy than I have just claimed to. When I color and I shade before Miss Oliver, I do not pity myself, I scorn the weakness. I know it is ignoble, a mere fever of the flesh, not, I declare, the convulsion of the soul. That is just as fixed as a rock, firm, set in the depths of the restless sea. Know me to be what I am, cold, hard man." I smiled incredulously. "You have taken my confidence by storm," he continued, "and now it is much at your service. I am simply in my original state, stripped of that blood-bleached robe with Christianity covers human deformity. A cold, hard, ambitious man, natural affection only of all the sentiments, has permanent power over me. Reason and not feeling is my guide. My ambition is unlimited. My desire to rise higher, to do more than others, insatiable. I honor endurance, perseverance, industry, talent, because these are the means by which men achieve great ends and mount to lofty eminence. I watch your career with interest because I consider you a specimen of diligent, orderly, energetic woman, not because I deeply compassionate what you have gone through or what you will suffer. You would describe yourself as a mere pagan philosopher." I said, "No. There is a difference between me and diegetic philosophers. I believe, and I believe the gospel. You missed your epithet. I've never seen that. You missed your epithet. I am not a pagan, but a Christian philosopher, a follower of the sect of Jesus. As his disciple, I adopt his pure, his merciful, his benign, benignant doctrines. I advocate them. I am sworn to spread them. One in youth to religion, she has cultivated my original qualities thus, from the minute germ, from the minute germ, natural affection. She has developed the overshadowing tree, philanthropy. From the wild, stringy roots of human uprightness, she has reared a due sense of the divine justice, of the ambition to win power and renown for my wretched self. She has formed the ambition to spread my master's kingdom, to achieve victories for the standard of the cross. So much has religion done for me, turning the original materials from the best to the best account, pruning and training nature. But she could not eradicate nature, nor will it be eradicated till his mortals shall put on immortality." Having said this, he took his hat, which lay on the table beside my pallet. Once more he looked at the portrait. "She is lovely," he murmured. "She is well named the Rose of the World indeed. And may I not paint one like it for you? And may I not paint one like it for you? Oh, buono. No." He drew over the picture the sheet of thin paper on which I was accustomed to rest my hand in painting, to prevent the cardboard from being sullied. What he suddenly saw on his blank paper, it was impossible for me to tell, but something had caught his eye. He took it up with a snatch. He looked at the edge and shot a glance at me, inexpressibly peculiar and quite incomprehensible. A glance that seemed to take and make note of every point in my shape, face, and dress, for it traversed all, quick and keen as lightning. His lips parted, as if to speak, but he checked the coming sentence, whatever it was. "What is the matter?" I asked. "Nothing in the world," was the reply. Then, replacing the paper, I saw him dexterously tear a narrow slip from the margin. It disappeared in his glove, and with one hasty nod, "Good afternoon," he vanished. "Well," I exclaimed, using an expression of the district, "that caps the globe, however." I, in turn, scrutinized the paper, but saw nothing on it save a few dingy stains of paint, where I had tried the tint in my pencil. I pondered the mystery for a minute or two, but finding it's insolvable, being certain it could not be of much moment, I dismissed it and soon forgot.